Ever since I can remember, numbers have been my refuge. They were predictable, logical, safe. While the human world seemed full of noise and rules that didn't make sense, mathematics was clear. I knew that 2 plus 2 would always equal 4, whereas the people around me could be unpredictable and sometimes even cruel. At school, I always stayed at the back of the classroom, far from the noisy conversations and curious stares of my classmates. My notebook was my best friend, filled with equations and graphs I created for fun. It was my own universe, a place no one else could reach, except for Julie Carter. Julie was different from everyone else. Since 5th grade, she had always sat next to me and seemed to understand that I wasn't like the others. "You have a brilliant mind, Chris," she'd say whenever she saw me scribbling in my notebook during breaks. When no one else talked to me, she made a point to include me in her conversations, even if I rarely knew what to say. That Monday, Mr. Johnson, my math teacher, decided to spice up the class. He drew an equation on the board, filled with variables and square roots, and turned to the class. "Here's a challenge for you all. This problem is difficult even for college students. Who thinks they can solve it?" The room went silent. Someone in the back laughed, and I heard Lucas Harris, the most popular boy in class, say, "Nobody here is nerdy enough for that." I looked at the board. For me, the numbers started organizing themselves almost automatically. Within seconds, the puzzle pieces were coming together. Hesitant, I raised my hand. "Chris," Mr. Johnson said, surprised. He knew I was good at math, but he had never seen me volunteer so willingly. "All right, come to the board." My heart was racing as I grabbed the marker. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I started writing, each step clear in my mind, the connections forming as I filled the board with my solution. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at Mr. Johnson. He carefully analyzed each line, adjusting his glasses. After a long silence, he said, "This is absolutely correct." The silence in the room was broken by muffled laughter. "How did you do that so fast?" Lucas asked, his tone full of skepticism. "Did you memorize it or something?" "He probably Googled it before class," someone said, and more laughter followed. My face burned. I tried to ignore the comments as I returned to my seat. Julie gave me an encouraging smile. "They don't get it, Chris. But you're amazing." I wanted to believe her, but I knew most of them didn't think so. A week later, something happened that would change everything. One sleepless night, I stumbled across a challenge on an online math forum. It was an advanced problem, posted by a university professor who said no one had found an elegant solution yet. I spent hours analyzing the problem. As I worked, it felt like the world around me disappeared. The numbers moved in my mind, dancing until, finally, the answer emerged. I typed the solution into the forum and submitted it, expecting nothing in return. To me, it was just another equation solved. The next morning, my mom knocked on my bedroom door. "Chris, you're on the internet." My mind immediately panicked. "What happened?" I asked, getting out of bed. "That?" She was holding the tablet, showing a news website. There I was, with the headline, "Teen solves math problem that left experts baffled." My heart raced. I didn't want this kind of attention. It was too much. But the situation turned out to be bigger than I imagined. During school recess, it seemed like everyone had heard the news. Some looked at me with admiration, but most, like Lucas, wasted no time criticizing. "Of course, he copied from someone," Lucas said loudly, surrounded by his friends. "Do you really think he's that smart?" "Maybe he used artificial intelligence," another boy commented, laughing. Before I could say anything, Julie jumped into the conversation. "Maybe you're all just jealous because you'd never solve something like that, even if you had 10 lifetimes." The others laughed, but Lucas just gave me a disdainful look. "This won't last," he said with a cynical smile. Later that day, I received an email that made me even more nervous. It was from a national math organization inviting me to participate in a competition in New York City. My mom was ecstatic. "Chris, this is incredible. You're going, right?" I hesitated. "What if I'm not good enough? What if they're right?" "Chris," she said, placing her hands on my shoulders, "you have a gift. Don't let fear stop you from sharing it with the world. Julie agreed when I told her. This is your chance. They need to see how amazing you are. You need to see it. That night, after much reflection, I sent my response. I accept. After accepting the invitation to the competition in New York, my life turned upside down. Every day felt like a challenge to balance my studies, preparing for the competition, and the doubts that still lingered in my mind. You're going to win, Chris. I'm sure of it, Julie said, throwing herself onto the couch in my living room while flipping through one of my notebooks. She had come over to help me review some advanced concepts. Win? I laughed nervously. I just want to survive. Did you see last year's competitors? They're actual geniuses. I just see numbers differently. Julie snapped the notebook shut with a thud and stared at me. You've got to stop saying that. You're not just anything, Chris. You have something special. Those people, they can't even imagine how your mind works. That's what will set you apart. I wanted to believe her, but every time I thought about the competition, I felt like an outsider in a world I didn't belong to. My mom tried to ease my anxiety. It's okay if you don't win, Chris, she said one night while cooking dinner. What matters is that you try. Show them what only you can do. Despite the encouraging words, the doubts persisted. So, to avoid overthinking, I threw myself into training. Mr. Johnson lent me books and helped me create practice problems that, according to him, were just as challenging as those in the competition. One day after class, he called me aside for a talk. Chris, do you know what makes a mathematician truly brilliant? I hesitated before answering. Solving problems? No, he said with a smile. The courage to face the unknown. Math isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about discovering what no one else can see. Those words stayed with me. A few days before the trip, I felt exhausted but more prepared. Julie, as always, was by my side. New York, Parker. It's time to show the world who you really are. The trip to New York was long, but when we arrived, the city felt like another world. The towering buildings, the constant noise, the movement. It was so overwhelming that I felt overloaded before we even entered the competition venue. The convention center where everything would take place was massive. Posters displayed famous mathematical formulas and photos of competitors from previous years. The words, National Math Competition, were written in giant letters at the main entrance, and just looking at them made my heart race. My mom held my arm. You'll be fine, Chris. Just focus on what you do best. The first challenge was registration. The hall was packed with competitors, and it seemed like everyone already knew each other. Groups were chatting animatedly, exchanging inside jokes that made me feel even more out of place. While we waited in line, I heard a familiar voice. Welcome to the show, Parker. I turned, and there he was, Lucas Harris. He wore a blazer and had a badge hanging around his neck. For a moment, I was confused. You? I asked. Yes, me, he replied with a provocative smile. I got a spot here too. Hope you're ready. My stomach turned. Not only would I be competing against brilliant strangers, but also against Lucas, who seemed determined to bring me down. The first challenge, held that same day, was a set of 5 logic problems. Competitors had 30 minutes to solve them, and the answers would be evaluated immediately to decide who advanced to the next round. When I sat at my desk and looked at the problems on the screen, everything around me disappeared. My brain went into automatic mode, and each question began to unfold like a story. The connections were clear, and the solution to each problem seemed to appear almost instantly. I finished in under 10 minutes and spent the remaining time reviewing. When the signal finally sounded and the judges began collecting the sheets, I noticed that many competitors were still working frantically. You're done already? Asked a girl at the desk next to me, her eyes wide. I nodded timidly. At the end of the day, the judges announced who would advance to the next stage. My name was called, but to my surprise and frustration, so was Lucas's. He shot me a provocative smile before leaving the hall. The next day, the hall was even more crowded. Only the competitors who advanced from the first round remained, but now the audience was starting to appear, parents, teachers, and even journalists. I felt small amidst all the commotion. The second round would be even more challenging. The problems involved advanced algebra and number theory. Each question would require not only a solution but also a complete demonstration and an explanation of the reasoning behind it for the judges. As I sat at my desk, I noticed Lucas a few seats away. He looked focused, but I knew better than to underestimate him. The problems appeared on the screen. As I began reading the first one, a chill ran down my spine. The structure of the question was eerily familiar, almost identical to something I had in my notebook, the one Lucas had stolen. I glanced in his direction, but he avoided my gaze. My mind started racing. Had he used my notes to influence the challenge? Or was it just a coincidence? Regardless, I had to focus. I thought back to the strategy one had developed while reconstructing my notes weeks ago. I decided to use the alternative approach I had created. Line by line, the problem began to unravel in my mind, and soon the other questions followed suit. Time flew by. When the round ended, I submitted my answers and left the hall to catch my breath. I was exhausted but confident. I knew I had done my best. Backstage, while waiting for the results, I felt a presence behind me. I turned and saw Lucas standing there, his expression unusually serious. "You're doing well, Parker," he said, his tone more neutral than usual. "I know what you did," I replied, my voice low but firm. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. My notebook. These problems." Lucas hesitated. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again. After a few seconds, he finally said, I needed something to stand out. My parents, they pressure me so much. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to yell at him, but another part recognized something in his voice. He was as lost as I was, except he had chosen the wrong path to handle it. "That doesn't give you the right to steal what's mine," I said finally. "You're right," he admitted. "I'm sorry." Before I could respond, one of the organizers called the competitors back. It was time to announce the finalists. My name was the first to be called. I felt immense relief but also knew that the Real Challenge was still ahead. When Lucas's name was called next, he looked at me, but this time his smile was different. It wasn't provocative anymore. It was something closer to respect. The day of the final round arrived with a different kind of energy. The hall was now packed with spectators, and cameras were broadcasting the competition live. The tension was almost tangible. The final round would take place on stage in front of everyone. Each competitor had to solve an incredibly complex problem live, explaining each step to the judges and the audience. Time was limited, and every mistake would be scrutinized. When my name was called, I felt my palms sweating. I climbed onto the stage, trying to block out the stares from the audience and focus solely on the problem in front of me. It appeared on the screen, a combination of differential calculus and linear algebra, with multiple layers of difficulty. I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered Mr. Johnson's words, "Math is about courage. It's about discovering what no one else can see." I picked up the marker and began to work. Each step was a challenge, but as I wrote, the connections started to emerge. My voice trembled slightly at first, but soon I gained confidence. I explained my reasoning step by step, drawing diagrams on the board to illustrate the patterns I saw. The hall was completely silent. When I finished, I wrote the final answer on the board and turned to the judges. "The answer is 873. The judges analyzed my work in silence, exchanging glances. Finally, one of them looked at me and said, "Correct." The audience erupted in applause. I looked at Julie in the front row. She was standing, clapping with a smile so big it seemed to light up the entire room. My mom was next to her, discreetly wiping away tears. When I returned backstage, Lucas was waiting. "You made it look easy," he said without sarcasm. "I never could have done that." "Thank you," I replied. He paused, and for the first time he seemed vulnerable. "I just wanted to say, good luck out there. You deserve this." I knew Lucas still had a lot to learn, but those words were a start. That night, as I looked at the trophy in my hands, I realized it was only a small part of the victory. The true prize was knowing that, for the first time, I believed in myself. The trophy felt insignificant compared to the size of the moment. The lights, the applause, the flashes of cameras. It all felt surreal. Yet, standing on stage with the trophy trembling in my hands, I understood that the competition wasn't the end of my journey, but the beginning. After the award ceremony, I was taken to a small room where the competitors, their families, and the organizers gathered. Some teachers and journalists approached me to offer congratulations. Julie arrived, practically bouncing with excitement. "Chris, you were incredible," she exclaimed, grabbing my arm as if trying to share all her energy. Before I could respond, I heard Lucas's voice. He was next to me, arms crossed, but his face no longer held the same smug expression. "You deserved it," he said simply. "Thank you," I replied, feeling like there was more to say but unable to find the words. He continued, his voice hesitant. "I know I made a lot of mistakes. What I did wasn't fair. But you taught me an important lesson today. It's not about winning or looking the best. It's about doing what you love the right way." For a moment, there was silence between us. Then, I extended my hand. He looked at it, surprised, but shook it firmly. Maybe it wasn't a new beginning for us, but it was the closure of something that had once felt impossible. The days after the competition went by in a blur. Back home, I received a level of attention I had never imagined. My teachers were proud, my classmates started treating me with respect, and even Lucas seemed different at school, less arrogant and more approachable. But what really moved me were the messages. Emails from people I had never met began pouring in. Parents of children who also felt different wrote to say that my story had inspired their kids. Autistic teens sent messages saying that my victory encouraged them to embrace their own abilities. One of the messages that struck me the most was from a mother who wrote, "My son watched your presentation and said, for the first time, that he thinks his differences might be something special. Thank you for showing him that being unique is a strength." I had never thought about the impact my victory could have beyond the trophy. But now, I realized the true value of it all was the inspiration my story could bring to others. Julie, of course, remained by my side. One afternoon, while we were studying together at my house, she asked, "So, what's next for the great math genius?" I smiled, picking up my notebook. "I've been thinking, what if we created something to help other kids learn math the way it works for me? Something like an app?" she suggested, her excitement building. "Exactly. Visual, interactive, something that shows patterns and connections the way I see numbers." Her eyes lit up. "Chris, that's brilliant. We can really make a difference." In the following months, I began developing the app. With Julie's support and the interest of a few organizations, the project came to life. Schools started using it in programs for neurodiverse children, and the response was overwhelming. Seeing kids learn math in a way that worked for them was more rewarding than any trophy. At one of the talks I was invited to give, I stood in front of an auditorium full of young people and parents. I looked at Julie, sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly as always. I took a deep breath and held the microphone. For a long time, I thought my differences made me weak. I thought being different was something I needed to hide. But what I've learned is that our differences are what make us strong. They give us a unique view of the world. Never let anyone tell you that you can't shine just by being exactly who you are. Applause echoed through the auditorium. As I stepped off the stage, I felt a sensation I had never experienced before. Not just pride, but purpose. My journey was far from over. But now, I knew that every step I took wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who, like me, needed to see that their differences were, in fact, their greatest superpowers.